Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. I'll keep this as brief as I can, and we'll try and allow some time for questions at the end. So this brief presentation is a summary, if you like, of my doctoral research, which I have just finished. And that research was inspired by my own personal practice of meditation and by my awareness of the deep spiritual fruits that flowed from it in my own life. And of course, while that can be a source of bias when you're doing research, it can also actually be a benefit. I observed, I spent 40 years in the world of education, and over that time, in more recent years, I observed the spread of mindfulness into schools. And I think that's just wonderful. I think it's absolutely marvelous that that is happening. However, I'm concerned that the practice of mindfulness tends to limit itself, particularly that of John Kabat-Zinn, tends to limit itself to the benefits and speaks to a much lesser extent to the fruits of meditation. And I wanted children to understand that there were deep spiritual fruits to the practice, as have been pointed out to us by all of the speakers over the last few days. I began the Meditation with Children project then based on what had been rolled out in England, and it's the practice of silent meditation in the Christian tradition of John Main. And what happens is the whole school stops 2 or 3 times a week, and every child in every class meditates in silence at the same time. They say children can meditate for approximately a year of age, so that they begin initially around 2 minutes, and then they work their way up to 4, 6, 8 minutes. A school might stop at that, but the senior classes may do a little bit more than the junior classes in time. And I have to say, of course, that this research took place in a particular cultural context of Ireland at this time, so that I can't generalize, about the results, but I did a qualitative research deliberately so that I could get a real sense of what it was like for a child to meditate and understand how it can impact on individual children. I can't say that all children who meditate will experience this. I set myself 3 core research questions. How do children perceive and describe the experience of meditation? What practical benefits do they consider they get from it? And does the practice impact on their spirituality? And if so, what is the nature of its impact? And I was particularly anxious to give children a voice. So that's the reason for writing the book, which comes out at the end of October, is that I wanted parents and teachers to understand that children can speak, they can give expression to their innate spirituality. So I undertook a literature review, and I won't spend any real time on that, but I looked at 3 broad areas, which were the spirituality of children, the psychology of meditation, that slide should read, and the methodology for the research. And regarding children's spirituality, I don't have time now to go into this in very much detail, but let me just say that in the study, children's spirituality is understood to refer to the awakening of the child's innate capacity for relational consciousness, expressed in terms of Thomas Merton's description of the true self. And Merton said, writing about that, he said that underlying the subjective experience of the individual self, there is an immediate experience of being. And we've had so many intimations of that from all of the speakers in the last number of days. An immediate experience of being, which is totally different from the experience of self-consciousness. And the different speakers have tried to bring out that understanding. And because it is ineffable, there is really no proper way to describe it. When we experience that form of consciousness, as Bernard described it, it's not merely psychological insight, but it's an experiential insight into our participation in being itself. We no longer see ourselves as objects, but as participants in being. In the context of Lawrence's talk this morning, the true self, I think, is our real identity, way beyond psychological self-awareness, bringing us into an awareness of pure self-consciousness. Regarding the psychology of meditation, contemplative psychology, the language I used in my research is a little bit different. I talk about conceptual knowledge and perceptual knowledge, and I think that contemplative psychology as a discipline validates both forms of knowledge. Now, the other speakers in the last few days haven't used the term perceptual knowledge, but it's what I mean by spiritual knowledge, that kind of mystical knowledge. and contemplative psychology also helps to explain how it is that children can experience deep spiritual experiences, but their capacity to describe those experiences will be limited by their capacity for verbal expression and by their cognitive development. And as adults, when we hear them talk about it, we can think that they're being irrational, when in actual fact they're being transrational because they don't have the capacity to describe what they're experiencing. And then for the academics here, my methodology was set in a critical realist paradigm, and I used hermeneutic phenomenology, which I adapted slightly for a mystagogical turn, was the actual methodology I used. Because of their limited cognitive development, as I say, children do find it difficult to give verbal expression to spiritual experience. And therefore, in doing the research, it's very important for me to pay attention to their non-verbal expressions. And I devised a number of methods to take account of that. The first was photo elicitation. And you can see I used 30 slides, 30 images, about A4 in size each image, and they were given to the children as part of the interview process, and they were asked to describe, to pick out some images that somehow reminded them of their experience of meditation. They were ordinary, everyday scenes. There was nothing, they weren't deliberately symbolic in any way. I simply took a variety of everyday experiences. And the images did facilitate the children in giving metaphorical expression to their experience of meditation. I also developed another approach, which I call the selection box, which comprised a set of about 30 comment cards. And on each card were brief phenomenological descriptions, just brief descriptions that children had given me in the course of their first interview. I had 2 interviews with each child, a half an hour each, about 3 weeks apart. And then as I finished all of the first interviews, I actually took out brief descriptions of what children said. And that enabled me to have children reflect on comments that other children had made, that they mightn't have thought of themselves, but using the comment box, the selection box, they were able to go through those comments and accept the ones that meant something to them and describe that. Okay, so it was a reasonably novel and useful way of doing things. And both of those methods helped me to help the children to give metaphorical expression to their experience. This was one of the images. And one of the children who chose this image, she said she chose it because the bird is absolutely still, and I'm still in meditation. I didn't like to tell her that the very taking of the photograph would make the bird seem still in any case. But then she went on to say that the branch is a living thing. It's a living tree. And she said, it's like a living person. Its buds are coming out. It's like its spirit is blossoming. And then as we went on in the conversation, the insight led her to say a little bit later that meditation allows the spirit to show its own shine, was the exact expression she used, which she said was unique to every person. Every child has their own shine, was how she expressed it. And she said, and this amazed me, meditation lets you know, okay, now it's your time to grow. Now, how can meditation let you know that? Because it's a form, it's not conceptual, it's perceptual knowledge, it's mystical knowledge. And that's what meditation, and many of the children spoke in that way. And I believe that that's an example of where a child was pointing metaphorically at the true self. She was understanding herself in a very, very deep mystical level. And that was the way that she did that. So the image helped her to give expression to the ineffable. The second example that I'm going to use, and I could use all 30, but I don't really have time. The second example, many of the children said they chose it because of its bright colours and because of how meditation, you know, they loved it, and meditation filled them with joy and a sense of freedom. It was quite interesting, like the variety of ways in which they could interpret the same metaphor. Some went on then to comment, as we discussed it, to say things like, meditation helps me to be myself. Well, I can't be sure exactly what the child who said that meant by it, but I argue that it actually points towards their metaphorical understanding of the true self, at a very, very, very deep level, pointing towards who they understood themselves to be. Bernard mentioned, I think, in his talk about how some of the mystics, and I think Mary did as well yesterday, how the mystics themselves speak of God through images, such as the fish in the ocean and the ocean in the fish and so on. And I think this is remarkable. I wasn't as aware of that as I am now, having listened to those speakers, but I think it's remarkable that the children themselves actually found that through the images, they also were able to give metaphorical expression to their own spiritual experience. Now my sample, I'm not going to spend time on this. I spoke to children who were aged from 7 to 12 in 4 schools, and 70 children in all. So I'll just leave, I won't go into any more detail on that slide. So let me remind you again, they were the questions, and this is how I went about it. So the first question was around how did they describe it, and you'll have to buy the book, because we don't have time today to go into more information. Okay. The book contains what I'm calling a phenomenological description, what the academic literature, what the discipline would describe as a phenomenological description. Max van Manen in particular talks a great deal about this. And effectively, a phenomenological description should be rich enough that as you read it, you feel you get a deep sense of what it might be like for the child to meditate. You might not understand it conceptually, but you get a deep sense of how the child experienced it. And I also identified 4 key elements to the experience. As regarding the practical benefits, I actually identified 4 themes in the thesis. I left it at 3, but when I wrote the book, I thought about it a little bit further. I must be using an old set of slides here. And finally, does the practice impact on the spirituality of children? And again, I identified 4 fruits from that experience. And I developed a heuristic model representing a matrix of deepening relational consciousness. Now, this slide here shows just diagrammatically the 4 elements of the experience. And they won't surprise you because of what you've heard over the last number of days. Children found it extremely simple. So simplicity was a key element. Serenity was a key element. A sense of self-awareness, a deepening sense of self-awareness. And what I'm calling a deepening sense of heart awareness, which is becoming more aware of that mystical element of who they truly are. Now, that first box is, as they sat in a meditation experience, that's what they described it was like to meditate. The next panel talks about how they describe the benefits of meditation. Now, there's huge literature over the last 25, 30 years on this, particularly since John Kabat-Zinn's research on mindfulness. But the children described it as meditation helps you to let go of all the drama. Meditation calms and restores you. It gives you energy and confidence, and it helps you to make better decisions. That was how they described it. As regards the fruits, which was really my area of interest, they said, in meditation you can be yourself, pointing towards the true self. They said you can feel the goodness deep inside. That's how they described the true self, really. They said, when I meditate, I feel the goodness deep inside. I'll give you some examples of each of these in a moment. You come closer to God through meditation, and you become a kinder person. And then when I was writing it up in the thesis, I had to relate it back to the literature review, so I renamed those from the children's language. You can be yourself became it deepens self-awareness. Now that also came up as an element of the experience, but here it's also one of the deep fruits, as over time they continued to meditate. You understand the distinction. Likewise, it awakens the heart to the true self. Over the longer period, they become more and more aware of that sense of pure being and of somehow touching into that, dipping into that well in the course of their meditations. Likewise, that meditation brings you closer to God. I'm describing that as it nourishes the spirit. And all of the speakers have pointed that out over the last few days. And finally, that it inspires authentic living. And I mean, meditation, if it doesn't, at the end of the day, show its fruit in how we live our lives, then we're not meditating properly. I summarized my findings then in a simple diagram. So I put them into a tree. The roots of the tree have the 4 elements that the children experience as they meditate, and they give rise to the benefits and the fruits. You'll notice how cleverly the tree is designed to look like a brain, human brain, and on the left hemisphere are the 4 practical, pragmatic benefits that they described. And on the right-hand side, the right hemisphere, which corresponds to the right hemisphere of the brain and to perceptual, mystical knowledge, are where I have put the 4 fruits. And I think that diagram summarizes in many respects. It's very nice to be able to say that after 3.5 years research, you can summarize it all in a single diagram. I also developed this diagram, which is just a heuristic model, because it shows again how the 4 elements of the fruits of meditation, how they all center around the true self. I couldn't say from my own research exactly how they interact, but I suspect that it begins with deepening of self-presence, which slowly but surely opens the heart and awakens us to the true self, which slowly but surely nourishes the spirit, and again, ultimately inspires authentic knowledge. Very quickly, 4 slides just to show each of these what the children said. Just read those quickly for yourself. I'll just leave 30 seconds on each slide. Now I could talk to that, but I don't have time, and I could have had 30 other. The book doesn't contain 30 other, the thesis does, but the book contains a fair reflection of those as well. So the fruit there was meditation deepens self-awareness, and you can see in their own language, that's what they said about it. They feel more of what I'm feeling. They really got to know themselves at a deep level. Meditation awakens the heart. Just read through those for yourself. I like the second one there. When you're not doing meditation, you have a sort of a snap. Not a photograph, but as if you're about to snap. The stress that Barry was talking about. As if you're always getting ready to snap, but when you do meditation, the goodness comes out. The badness goes out and the goodness flows in. And Dhiren, I think Dhiren's is just magical. Like a secret garden that you pass by every day, but in meditation you come across it. So many of the children then described that as a sense of goodness. And not alone did it make them aware of the sense of goodness in themselves, but it made them deeply aware of the goodness then that is in the other person, because they had dipped in and understood that perceptually, mystically, that sense of pure being. They knew that they were no different from the other person. The third fruit was that meditation nourishes the spirit. And Karen at the end, I mean, I have lovely stories about, was Karen not her twin sister? But I haven't time to go into them. But a lot of the children spoke about a pet who had died, or a grandfather, or somebody else in the family who had died, and how they came very close to them in meditation, and through that they came close to God in meditation. I just wish I had more time. Meditation then inspires authentic living. Just read through those. I mean, look at Helena. Helena was 7 years old. And yet you could say that when meditation is deep in you, you feel like you were somewhere you've always wanted to be since you were small. What does that say about her intuitive understanding of where she came from, of who she truly was? Now, if you look at Jason's comment, I'll be honest with you. I'm meditating 15 years. And I always say to teachers when I'm introducing it that the first 15 years are the hardest. If after 40 years meditating, I was able to sum up what meditation was about by saying that meditation is like a map and your destination is who you really are, I think that boy is a mystic. He certainly understands mystical experience. It's a powerful description. And I was so taken by that, I called him back the next day when I was in the school. And I said, do you remember you said this to me? I said, did somebody say that to you, a friend or a priest? Or he was making his confirmation that year, outside of school. This was in an Educate Together school here in Dublin. And they were following a form of guided meditation rather than Christian meditation. And yet that is exactly how he spoke about it. And Derek talked about a certain stretching of him. Now, I wish I had more time to go into those. But in essence, can I simply say, to finish up with this, that as far as what have I learned from this? Well, I think, first of all, it brings to the fore the vital importance of paying attention to the personal spiritual experience of children and creating opportunities for personal spiritual experience. I'm not saying that meditation is the only way to do that. But I'm saying that it's a vital way, and it does so in a way that touches them personally. I think all of the speakers have averted to that. Secondly, I think it strikes an important note about the importance somehow of finding opportunities to talk to children about the experience. Now, in fairness, most of the teachers that I spoke to didn't do that. They didn't really feel equipped to dip into that. So I'm including in the book pieces on the photo elicitation and on the selection box and so on, and suggesting they might use methods like that to simply get children talking. You have to be very careful, of course, because you can't force a child to talk about it. It's a deeply personal experience, but you can create the opportunity, and if they want to, they can do so. The research also had a surprising effect in that there was a strong sense in which, as well as helping the individual, meditation in the school on a whole school basis also seemed to create a deepening sense of community self-presence. And within a Catholic school, within a denominational school in particular, it deepened the faith experience somehow of everybody. So I think the research suggests also that the two practices that I looked at, which were guided meditation in the denominational school and the denominational meditation, the Christian meditation in the two Christian schools, that they seem to be equally effective, not just in bringing about the benefits, but also in bringing about the fruits. And I'd love to do some further research on that. And finally, it suggests that Christian meditation, I believe, can be introduced and explored in a secular context. I think we can build on mindfulness and on the popularity of mindfulness. And if schools have introduced mindfulness, we can go in there and say, well, you can bring this to a deeper level. And even when the approach I take in introducing it in the schools is to begin with the mindfulness practice, because that is so widely accepted in society. And once they've accepted that, you can then tell them a little bit more about the benefits, and maybe a month later come back and talk about the fruits. I'll leave you again with the slides. Thank you very much.